I know that you're worried about a press blowback, but imagine a scenario where 350 people arrive to a remote island, are herded onto yellow school buses, drop to the festival's site that's unfinished, and realize they have no place to sleep. And, to make it worse, they have no way to go home because we don't have any charter flights booked back for them. There's no worse situation than that. Mark did...
That's pretty wild, because that's exactly what happened. Hey, I'm going to lay out a very specific scenario for you that you don't want to have happen. And it could happen. But here's like basically all the ways in which it could happen. Don't let it happen, okay? Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. Good dance party. Good musical interlude. All right. And now, for more... And then for like the next 6 hours, Lance just kept playing dance music and chair dancing and...
Promotional material was shot in December 2016, and Kendall Jenner made a post promoting Fyre Festival in January 2017. Ja Rule and Billy made a toast to, quote, living like movie stars, partying like rock stars, and fucking like porn stars. And
hell yeah.
Isn't that a lyric from a Pitbull song? I've been on a Pitbull kick recently. Is that not... That is from a Pitbull song, I think. Maybe it's not. Maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, they were selling a vision, and not a cheap one either. Some of these tickets cost $1,500, while others were up to $250,000 for the weekend. Billy and Ja Rule sold an incredible amount of tickets, reportedly between 6,000 to 7,000 people intended on coming, and it would take place in late April 2017. However, if you're paying any attention to those dates, you probably already know that something is very wrong. This leaves Billy and his team only 4 months to set up this entire festival.
Oh, I totally agree. The Fyre Festival and everything that happened will never stop being funny, because it was just like, it's a grift within a grift that incorporated like a whole bunch of like, you know, musicians, influencers, all these people, and one person who was trying to scam them all and just try and get away with the whole thing. While it really did appeal to people who were willing to pay a lot of money to be able to have this kind of like weird island living rave experience.
Prepared and scrambling would be an understatement. Samuel Cross, a former Fyre media employee, said that he was 22 or 23 at the time, and despite never having booked talent before, he was asked to hire the artists that would play the festival. He was able to grossly overpay artists and book them for the weekend. However, keep in mind that these musicians have sound, lighting, and stage expectations for their shows too.
And writers.
Once again, these things can take a lot of time. And
if you didn't know, huge musicians, especially DJs, they have these things called writers, which is a list of things that they demand that you provide. So if you work in like the electronic music industry or in the entertainment industry, they'll come out with these pages that are like, okay, so you got to get me a hotel room. It's got to be provided with 4 bottles of Dom. I want to have like 13 chicken nugget super meals. I want to have like, if you could find maybe like an iguana and paint him orange. If the one that arrives is an orange, I want that too. Like all those things are supposed to be injected into your costs as well.
Money to prepare for.
Blue Reese's Pieces,
yeah. One of the technical production workers, those behind Fyre Festival only began filming their stage set up 45 days before the festival was due to begin. In addition, the owner of the island they were shooting kicked Billy off. The owner wanted a new reputation for the island
with random
drug
shit.
trafficking.
Wow.
So they saw social media posts touting Fyre Festival as taking place on Pablo Escobar's island. Billy was forced to find a different island entirely. The location for the festival eventually became the Great Exuma, the largest of the cays in the Bahamas. However, rather than a bright sandy beach as advertised, the area that the Fyre team booked was a potentially hazardous housing development. Few outsiders suspected anything was wrong at this point, but there were a few outliers. One man, Calvin Wells, worked with the agents of these well-known musicians and heard that these bands had been promised money that wasn't being delivered. He began digging a bit deeper into Fyre Festival, and Calvin discovered the festival location. It was no isolated island, but an underdeveloped lot just north of a sandals resort. And in Fyre's promotional material, they were photoshopping out the rest of the island to make it appear as if Fyre Cay was a deserted island dedicated to the event. Wells created the Twitter account.
I mean, you know, at least they didn't go as far as like trying to blow up some roads to be like, oh, well, don't worry, we'll make an island. Well, it'll be an island one way or another.
Fyre Fraud
It's
months
a fucking
before the
inlet.
festival in an attempt to warn people, but struggled to gain any traction on his posts. Calvin claims he then went to the Bahamas for himself to see what was going on and discovered that the luxury festival tents were nothing more than leftover emergency relief tents from Hurricane Matthew. Not only were the tents far from what was promised, but they couldn't deliver on the number of villas promised either. To add to the growing number of issues, McFarland had booked the Fyre Festival the same weekend that the National Regatta takes place in Bermuda. This boating event is massive. bigger than the Super Bowl. The island population doubles, and villas and hotels are booked for months in advance. So, as you can imagine, for McFarland and his team, trying to find villas for hundreds of people during the...
Like, I just want to throw this out there in case anyone is ever inspired to try one of these absolute disasters again. The amount of prep and organizing necessary to, like, pull out a full-on music video, music festival, it is astonishing how many, like, different pieces you need working in conjunction. Like, there's things you don't even think about. Like, the amount of porta potties per human. Like, every 10 people, you need one porta potty. The amount of, like, space you need in between them. Is there food vendors? What's the adequate water source? How are people going to get transported in and out? What is your security staff? What is your ambulance staff? What is your medical staff? Like, that's why if people are trying to use this as a venue for making it a cheap or quick buck, you end up with people dying. Like, it can genuinely end up as an absolute disaster.
The exact same weekend just wasn't going to happen.
Terrorist threats, emergency plans,
as one
all
of
that
his
stuff.
former employees puts it, they were selling villas that just didn't exist. McFarland was trying to build a city within a city. They needed running water, waste disposal, plumbing, electricity, and shelter for thousands of people within mere months. According to Marianne Roll, a local that owns an Exuma Point restaurant, they had every living soul on the island of Exuma who could lift a towel working. A former Fyre employee estimated there were 200 workers, and Marianne, as the restaurant owner, was in charge of feeding them. Cash flow was also becoming an issue for those on the app development side of things, with one employee claiming their favorite Friday topic was consistently, "Did you get paid and was it the right amount?" Between all of these compounding problems, those around Billy tried to warn him and tell him that the event needed to be canceled. One of these people was Keith Vanderland, a pilot in charge of flying Billy around the Bahamas. According to Keith, Billy's team really wanted to do tents, so what I did is I took my wife and we tried to sleep in a tent for one night, and it was so terrible. You know, this tent is just not going to be safe, and it's so loud, so many mosquitoes. To do these tents without air conditioning is pretty brutal, so I strongly recommended against the tents. Billy at some point told me, "Listen, you need to step back. I know we're going to go with different people. Thanks for your help so far." I wasn't the only one that was changed out in February, March. Just to recap what we have so far, Billy and his team shot promotional material in a location they no longer had access to. The location they did have was an underdeveloped lot of land north of a Sandals resort without proper plumbing, electricity, or running water. They hired hundreds of local workers to build for the festival around the clock. Some say they slept 3 hours on average. The musicians had not been paid, and Billy let go of people that had concerns. So, what more could go wrong? The website and news from senior meetings was leaked to the public. Needless to say, Billy was not happy when he saw this. According to Mark Weinstein, a festival consultant, they all had a meeting which was in essence a witch hunt meeting. The team was told that if it was discovered that any one of them was releasing information to Fyre K, that person would be fired and legal action would be taken against them.
Fired from the Fyre Festival.
Former employees claimed that the owner of the Fyre K site was extorting Billy. They refused to take the website down unless Billy and the Fyre Festival team released genuine photos of the campsite to their followers. A senior member of the team, event manager Andy King, told Billy that, quote, "We need to get the messaging out now that this is not a luxury music festival. People aren't staying on yachts, at least most of them aren't. Many of them aren't staying in villas, and if you can't get that messaging out now, we will be able to manage expectations," end quote. But Billy refused. He told members of the team that if they wanted to leave, then they could leave. Otherwise, they were trying to find solutions. The trouble is, it was too late for solutions. The team needed more time and money that they simply did not have. At one point, the desperation to get things done became not only alarming, but disturbing. According to Andy King, they had 4 18-wheeler trucks filled with Evian water, and customs demanded $175,000 from Billy in order for the water to be released. Billy called Andy and told him that, since Andy was a gay man, he needed Andy to go to customs and, quote, "suck Cunningham's dick," end quote, to get the water released. Andy claims that he was fully prepared to do this and save the festival, but Cunningham, the head of customs, told him that he'd
Wait, what? What? He was fully prepared to do this? That's where you, like, hang up the phone and go, holy shit, this guy is fucking, this whole thing is a disaster.
release the water so long as he was the first one to be paid when the event ended.
I didn't know that part, no.
In some attempt to try and get more money from the people that were already unknowingly being taken advantage of, emails were sent from the Fyre Festival team to the attendees. One such email read, "I noticed you hadn't created your Fireband account yet. It is your wallet for the weekend, so load it appropriately. The majority of our guests have added $3,000 for the weekend, but if you want to reserve tables or take part in
your
adult
Fyre
experiences, you will want to put on much more." This RFID bracelet
Oh, it's on the
hadn't
Netflix
been
doc? I've
tested.
seen that.
It
I
wasn't
guess
feasible with connection issues
put that
on the
one out of my
island,
brain.
nor was it meant to make the Fyre Festival a cashless experience. Its sole purpose was to get more money into Billy and his team's pockets because they were running low.
Non-fireable tokens.
Some attendees say they were called and told rather aggressively to put money on the bands after already having spent thousands on a ticket. Still, many bought into this, and the first rounds of attendees uploaded $800,000 to them. Not that this money went to housing, as the houses that they were sourced weren't getting paid either. Nor did it go to catering, apparently, since they only paid $1 million of a $6 million contract to Star Catering, and Billy fired them over the phone 2 weeks before the event. Andy was able to save them from this disaster as well, but the question became, was the festival worth saving at all? Naturally, attendees started to grow worried as the event got closer. More and more people reached out to Fyre Festival, whether through emails or Instagram DMs and comments, trying to get flight information and see photos of their accommodations. All of these were reasonable requests, but Fyre Festival took to deleting comments or ignoring emails instead. Consultant Mark Weinstein again tried to warn Billy and sent an email that roughly read, "I've tried to warn you multiple times, but my words have fallen on deaf ears. We are 1 day out without enough beds to safely house our staff, our VIP guests, and our paid customers. You need to cancel more guests immediately. I know that you're worried about a press blowback, but imagine a scenario where 350 people arrive to a remote island, are herded onto yellow school buses, drop to the festival's site that's unfinished, and realize they have no place to sleep. And, to make it worse, they have no way to go home because we don't have any charter flights booked back for them. There's no worse situation than that." Mark did...
That's pretty wild, because that's exactly what happened. Hey, I'm going to lay out a very specific scenario for you that you don't want to have happen, and it could happen. But here's like basically all the ways in which it could happen. Don't let it happen, okay? All right.
Did get an email in return that read, "At least they'll see your smiling face and yoga skills," as Mark was going to be a yoga instructor for the event. The festival was on, despite all the warnings, the site being unfinished, and a massive rainstorm soaking the mattresses and destroying much of the site the night before the event. Billy refused to call it off. Andy claimed that he tried to see the positive side and thought of Woodstock. Many people don't talk about the trapped cars, the mudslides, how many people died of drug overdoses, the lack of food and water, so therefore Fyre Festival could be like the next Woodstock and potentially be looked on in a positive light. As we know now, that obviously was not meant to be. On the day of the festival, Blink-182 canceled the show because, as they posted to Twitter, they believed they couldn't give their fans a quality performance. As they didn't scream, "Don't go, it's going to be a disaster," attendees weren't alarmed. Though the plane wasn't the quality jet they were promised, things seemed fine upon their arrival. Guests were given a choice if they wanted to go to the campsite or a restaurant, with many choosing the restaurant. This was the same location owned by Marianne Roll, who later states that nothing was ever planned. She only knew hundreds of attendees were arriving 25 minutes before they showed up. However, for the guests that went to the campsites instead of drinking and dancing at the bar, they saw that the mattresses were soaked and there was mud everywhere. To say this festival was a disappointment does not begin to even explain the gravity of the situation. Those on this island didn't know where they were headed. They had no direction whatsoever. Finding a tent and finding luggage became a free-for-all. One attendee claims that he didn't want neighbors. They wanted to be isolated from the sea of people, so his friends started pissing on the beds and poking holes in tents around them. Another states that there was a looting mentality and one woman had a whole pallet of toilet paper. Someone else had an entire box of pillows, and it
I love that as a whole bunch of trust fund babies and rich kids, and it became Lord of the Flies so fast.
became barbaric. Later, in a documentary around the event, Billy himself claims that they had rented 250 houses and they had receipts and photographs for each one. However, the reason guests couldn't access them is because they had a box of keys to the homes that went missing. And personally, I don't believe the statement about a box of keys that magically goes missing, especially considering that no former employees have ever verified this, but make of it what you will. A writer for Vogue, Amanda Brooks, later wrote an article about her personal experience entitled, "I went to Fyre Festival and all I got was this third-degree sunburn." She claims that she split an 8-person glamping tent with friends for...
There's an internet historian video where he explains it was not just rich kids at all. In reality, the price was around $1,000 to $2,000. For the, are you saying for the entire experience? That, like, how could you afford a $2,000 ticket or experience and you don't have any kind of disposable income? Like, that seems like a very expensive, extravagant thing to spend money on.
$500 per person. The plane to the festival felt like a party bus, but Amanda said she had a fantastic time at the bar and on the island itself. It wasn't until later that night, when Amanda was told tents hadn't been assigned, that things started to fall apart. She and her friends slept on wet mattresses while some of the wealthier guests were able to get private planes or yachts out of there. Soon, the tweets about Fyre Festival started going viral. People's photos of their luxury lunches, the concierge stand, and the
This is about when I joined the story. When I was just on Twitter one day and I was like, wait, what's going on with the Fyre Festival? Why is it trending? And then you start seeing all the photos and they were promised like these incredible, exquisite, like lavish dishes. And all of a sudden they showed pictures and it would be like 2 Wonder Breads with like 1 slice of American cheese in between. And like the people who got that were the lucky ones. They're like, yeah, and like a lot of people are like trying to get my like cheese bread right now. And I'm like, I'm one of the few people who got it.
lockers that didn't have locks on them were blowing up. Memes about Fyre Festival went viral, and
Here we go.
Billy's Dwight asked their social media team, Jerry Media, to do some damage control. Jerry Media told Grant that they couldn't actually save this, and within minutes, Grant hired a new social media team. Even when it was canceled, things didn't get easier. Guests couldn't get off the island right away, and instead were held overnight without food and water. Apparently for one flight, the pilot's head count didn't match up with the manifest. There were 111 names, but 112 people on the flight. Everyone had to get off the plane, but then the flight crew had to be changed out. The doors to the waiting room were locked, trapping the people there before the flight could finally depart. In addition, Bahamian workers owed money for their labor went on strike when they realized they weren't going to get paid. A former Fyre
That's like a
Festival
really fucked up side
employee
of the
said
story.
that some of these Bahamian workers started putting hits out on people, either to take them hostage and get a ransom or to hurt and injure. Andy claims that he changed clothes with an employee and hid in the back of a car to get to safety, later suffering from PTSD symptoms because of it. Those that worked on the app were devastated because they truly believed in the product.
So Butter Queerson says people were seeing it as their one chance at a great vacation for that price. So people were using their savings and selling shit. So like, if that is the case, if there is like the majority of the people who went to this were in fact just people willing to spend thousands of dollars on something this, like, even the lineup wasn't that amazing. It was like Major Lazer, Blink-182. Blink-182 dropped out. Ja Rule, I think, who has more to blame than anyone in this whole fiasco, because he's like one of the like key organizers and key promoters of the whole thing. Even though when you watch like the Netflix doc, it shows that he was kind of like taken for a ride as well by the scam artist who like tried to pull this whole thing off. But then that's very depressing, you know, that like just because of a handful of influencers who made posts about this, people were actually sold on the idea that this is worth pulling together like what savings you have, because this is like the experience of a lifetime. You could like, it's a party on Pablo Escobar's like private island, and there's going to be exquisite food, and you can what is it, like fuck like a porn star and live like a Wall Street banker and all this other shit.
Brand, but the festival had completely ruined them. Ja Rule insisted that no one got hurt, therefore they could bounce back and move on. When confronted over a team call with the fact that Fyre had committed fraud, he said this was just a case of false advertising. Unfortunately for Fyre Media, those that attended didn't see it that way, and neither did their lawyers. On May 1st, 2017, a $100 million class action lawsuit was filed against Fyre Festival. Not only this, but a second separate lawsuit was filed against the influencers for promoting said festival without disclosing that they were profiting from these posts. The lawsuit against Fyre Festival itself lists all the things we've discussed thus far, like how underprepared Billy was for the festival, and it reveals a lot about these troubling. Billy and Ja Rule actually personally reached out to performers and celebrities and warned them, acknowledging that the festival was going to be under-equipped and potentially dangerous. So the argument here can't be made that either of them were not aware what a mess this was going to turn into. The pair had the foresight to warn musicians to stay away, but not their paying customers. Plus, because Fyre Festival made this a cashless event, insisting that many attendees get wristbands, people were in even more danger. They couldn't ride in local buses or taxis, which only take cash, and were forced to depend on Fyre Festival for transportation. Plus, while waiting for a plane home, locked inside the airport without food or water all night, one attendee suffered a medical emergency and lost consciousness. So much for Ja Rule's comment about how no one got hurt. About a week or two after the festival finished, Billy called for an all-hands-on-deck meeting with his employees to tell them that no one would be fired, but that no one would be getting paid either. Refusing to lay them off meant that these employees could not file for unemployment and were essentially forced to quit. Multiple members of the team spoke to the FBI as investigations began, and the full extent of Billy's fraud began to emerge. Yes, he'd lied to customers and put their safety at risk, but he defrauded investors too. He created fake invoices saying that musicians had been paid for millions of dollars, when in reality, about $57,000 had been paid. Wow. He also claimed that he owned over $2 million in Facebook shares, when in actuality, he had about $1,000 worth. When one investor saw all these numbers, they were willing to put $800,000 on the line without any knowledge that the documents were faked. Still, Billy was not done with the Bahamas. He wanted to do a recovery documentary, according to one of his videographer friends.
The thing I don't get, honestly, from like the perspective of Billy, if you're just a grifter like this and you're trying to scam people, there's a lot of safer ways that won't endanger like hundreds, if not thousands of people's lives to grift and to like get investors to pool money into something that you could pull to run, like crypto. Why not just have done, if he had done crypto, no one's lives would have been in danger. No one, like this whole thing wouldn't be a massive fiasco. He'd probably have gotten away with the whole thing.
And returned to the Bahamas to get their merchandise. Since they hadn't paid their customs duties, all their merchandise had been seized. Rather than pay the duties, Billy allegedly intended on robbing customs themselves. The Bahamas were done with Billy, and they banned him from conducting business there whatsoever.
Yeah, no shit.
There could never be a Fyre Festival in the Bahamas again. So, what about the States? Well, a month after the event, Billy met with Ja Rule to try and plan Fyre Festival 2018, but the FBI was having none of that. In July 2017, Billy was arrested.
I gotta be honest, I respect the hustle at that point. After everything that went down, it's like, all right, but wait for the sequel. All right, it's coming. Holy shit.
Or a scheme to defraud investors by misrepresenting financial information about Fyre Media. June H. Kim, the acting United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York, said in a statement, McFarland allegedly presented fake documents to induce investors to put over $1 million into his company and the fiasco called the Fyre Festival. Billy was released on bail and strangely seemed to be living the high life with his girlfriend. Yet once again, he wasn't spending his own hard-earned money to do this. Back in December 2017, many Fyre...
Okay, this is a total sidebar. Has everyone seen that new Netflix doc, The Tinder Swindler? I think that's what it's called. Or maybe that's just the name of the guy. I think it might be goes by another name. But it blew my mind. I can't talk about this without spoiling it. All right, I won't spoil it. It's really fun. It's a good documentary. Here's the non-spoiler, okay? So you're not going to be in trouble here. Someone has been managing to defraud women for a long time by posing as this like lavish, extravagant, I'm a multi-millionaire, Israeli diamond heir and all this kind of stuff. And on Tinder profiles, people meet him. They go on dates with him. It's like everything checks out. He's like got private jets. He takes them to the best restaurants. They eat the best food, but they don't find out until much later that the whole thing is this like cyclical grift where the person he's grifting is actually paying via credit card, stolen credit card, for the things that he's showing off to the next person in line and getting them all to fall in love with him, thinking that he's this multi-millionaire kind of thing. Con man that just goes on and on and on. But the thing is, like, it always astonishes me how these people continue to just like live out in the open. Like, yes, I did the Fyre Festival. Yes, I scammed lots and lots of people. Yes, I put people's lives in danger, not to mention all the workers that I exploited who will never be paid for this. And like, you know, this is all fucking yikesy and fucked up. But hey, look at me now. You know, I've still got the limos, still got the lifestyle, still drinking the Dom, still wearing the Gucci. Everything looks great on my end. So yeah, just gonna keep on doing these things.
Festival attendees received an email from Frank Tribble entitled New York City VIP Access. The email offered tickets to the Met Gala, to Victoria's Secret fashion shows, and similar exclusive events. Frank Tribble may have been the name and phone number behind the operation so that
he went to prison.
God, those communists are amazing.
Oh, Prince of Cats, thank you for the 200 biddies. I appreciate that. Yeah, but after all of this, like, he was still in the midst of organizing Fyre Festival 2 and like living out brazenly in the open about this all.
No one would recognize Billy's voice, but Billy fed Frank a script to read. He was scamming people yet again. Everything in these email scams was easily debunked, as you can't buy tickets to some of these events to begin with. Still, he allegedly made off with over 6 figures from the fraudulent tickets. Even more charges
Henry
were brought against
Kissinger
Billy,
is still alive.
this time for lying to a federal enforcement officer, wire fraud, and money laundering. In July 2018, when Billy was caught, the Department of Justice released an article that read in part, Manhattan U.S. Attorney Jeffrey S. Berman said, William Billy McFarland, CEO of Fyre Media, previously pled guilty to defrauding investors of Fyre Media and the infamous Fyre Festival and a ticket vendor of over $26 million. While that fraud case was pending, McFarland engaged in yet another scam purporting to sell tickets through a company called New York City VIP Access to exclusive events. These customers later learned that the tickets didn't exist and that this was another fraud in McFarland's disturbing pattern of deception. McFarland's fraudulent schemes cost real people real money, and now he faces real time in federal prison for his crimes. About a month later, Mark Weinstein, the yoga instructor whose concerns were dismissed, released a Medium article detailing his thoughts and experiences about the festival too.
Good to see you.
He wrote that in a way, the Fyre founders like Billy were doing what many people do, creating images on social media that don't wholly reflect reality. Fyre Festival was an Instagram festival, or that idea of inaccuracy take.
But that's why it reminds me of this Tinder swindler guy, because he was doing the exact same thing. He was like, I'm just so rich. Look at my Instagram account. Look at all the flash and the style that I have. And I was like, immediately my alarm bells went off, because I was like, people who are legitimately that rich, they're also not engaged in wanting to flaunt it 24/7. Most of them actually live very modest lives compared to this. It's not like, I just travel the world in my private jet and I just go to party after party and spend thousands of dollars on dom and caviar and all this kind of shit.
To the extreme.
That's if you want to sell
throughout
yourself
his time working in
as
the
being
Bahamas,
rich.
His account was full of pictures
New
of
rich
crystal
versus
clear
old, yeah.
waters,
Good
beach
point.
patios, and sunsets, even though it was one of the most stressful times of his life and largely spent in front of a computer. Of course, the important distinction to make here is that Mark wasn't trying to sell anything, let alone for thousands of dollars at the blatant disregard for the safety of his potential customers. In total, McFarland forfeited about $26.2 million and a few months later was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Apparently, it hasn't been treating him well either, as McFarland has been placed in solitary confinement for making a podcast about his crimes called Dumpster Fire. McFarland's claimed that he's taken a long, hard look at himself and the people he's hurt.
What? What's the last refuge of the scam artist? Podcasting. Good to know. Good to know.
In prison, though articles covering the topic seem skeptical about how genuine this apology is, to put it mildly. Meanwhile, those who've been trying to recoup their losses are struggling. While it looked like ticket holders would receive a $7,000 refund, bankruptcy trustee Gregory Messer has only been able to recover $283 each.
Yeah.
Models had to pay back some of the money they received for advertisements. Kendall Jenner paid back $90 of the $275,000 she received, for example. But the people that bought tickets have mostly had to chalk this up as a loss.
Why not have to give it all back? You're a billionaire. All of these people are super rich. Emily Ratajkowski, who's supposed to be a leftist, you're all crazy rich.
Two of Billy's employees claim that they're now liable for the debt on American Express cards that Billy racked up from the festival. One of the Fyre app's credit cards owed over $500,000 because Billy was also paying for Magnesis tickets on it, and while Billy paid much of it off, Amex is now suing one of Billy's employees for the remaining balance, $250,000.
McFarland was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. In July, it was reported that McFarland tested positive for COVID-19 at the facility. Oh, really?
Those that suffered in the Bahamas lost thousands upon thousands, too.
That's the saddest part
Marianne
of the
Roll
story.
claims she's owed $134,000 from organizers, and Ian Nicholson, carpenter, is still owed payments for the many 18-hour days he worked for the Fyre Festival. Thankfully, donors to GoFundMe were able to raise $238,000, so there has been help in that regard. As for other consequences, Jarul has taken no responsibility whatsoever for his part in Fyre Media. He has instead launched a new talent booking platform called Icon. Grant Margolin paid a $35,000 penalty and agreed to a 7-year director and officer bar, but didn't admit to or deny any SEC charges. Ja Rule seems to have moved on from the entire thing without a scratch somehow, and he even sold a $122,000 Fyre Festival NFT in March 2021. He's also become part owner of Flipkick, a website devoted to selling NFTs, just a few short weeks after learning what NFTs were. And of course, before I close out today's episode, I have to at least mention the controversy with the documentaries. I used both the Hulu and Netflix documentaries as sources for this episode, as well as various articles. Each documentary has its own merit, but each has its own massive downside. For Hulu, they paid Billy McFarland for an interview. The exact amount hasn't been disclosed, but even if it were a single cent, it's disgusting to give him anything after what he's done. And as for the Netflix documentary, they were made in part by none other than Jerry Media, the same exact company that Billy hired to shoot the promotional material for Fyre Festival. In the documentary itself, employees and the CEO of Jerry Media claimed that they weren't aware of the behind-the-scenes chaos at Fyre Festival, but it's a
I had no idea about that. Wow. Unreal. Not surprising.
Conflict of interest to have employees of Jerry Media both be the subject and producers of a documentary. Netflix doesn't actively hide this. You can see the CEO of Jerry Media's name in their opening credits, and Jerry Media listed as a producer at the end credits. But this questionable relationship isn't disclosed within the documentary itself, so many may not know this without looking for it. Still, if you want to hear more about this case, either one tells an interesting story and hammers the point home that this was no failed party, but a genuinely dangerous situation to be placed in. And so with that being said, that's where we're going to end this week's episode of Multi-Level Mondays. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something new, and if you did, make sure you're liking, following, and subscribing
Speaking of which, I know Illuminati is a massive channel with like 1 mil subs, but y'all should still be watching her videos. She does really good work, deep dives, all that kind of stuff, and has done a lot of really good work uncovering like Alex Jones, Tucker Carlson, all that kind of stuff. She does awesome work. Oh, hypocrite alert! But bam, don't worry, it's a burner account. I was sub to her on other channels. I'm not all bad. You know, there's things that are bad, but there's things that aren't all bad.
Do you enjoy the Serfs but prefer not to have to use your eyeballs? Many are saying this. Well, we've got the solution for you. It's the Serf Times in podcast form. Available on most major podcasting networks now. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving a good review and feedback because it really helps the show out, apparently, and it's free, just like the podcast.
To our gods, Xander Corvus and Peyton L. Just, we beseech thee to smite down our enemies. To our monarch, Tom Spiker, we are but your humble court jesters, here to amuse you. To our lords, Trevor R., we give thanks for this spit of land for us to eke out this meager existence. To our knights, Merid, Cheryl Alvarez, Ruby Kelly, Ellie Leslie, Alex P., Brandon, Words Greenwood, Nate, that one guy, Hagbird Celine, Matthew Scarborough, Stellar Vision, Ariane McCarthy, Daniel Sutton, Coulter Smith, Val 9000, Jenna Tall, Quiet 185, Anna Loves Riley, Omni, Riley and Anna, Poodlehawk, The Tim Caucus, Multimondi, Trevor Yanis, Lemmy 101, Anthropophojak, Cern 42, Catherine, Radical Maniac, Ramon Acosta, Nkosin, Violent Orchard, Sophie Baby, Political Puppy, Andreas Chiringuito, Zach Christensen, Josh Mickelson, Todd Buckingham, and Todd Lajeunesse. We raise our flag in a veil, and we salute you, our friends.